Hey, how y'all doing? It's Gary, the guy in the pink shirt. Apparently, I'm flying a little cartoon jet with the number 3 over it. Hey, we all gotta have dreams. Thanks for joining us. This is a free webinar. The 3 IFR alternates you need in every flight plan, in every IFR flight plan. Let's just get going. All of these suggestions, and they are my suggestions, you're not going to find them in rules very often. All these suggestions are the ones that I've learned over 22 years of teaching all over the country and even a little bit internationally, great pilots how to be great at using the new technology like Garmin and Aspen and Avidyne and Estek. I'm a button pusher by habit, but these are things that I've learned over 22 years of experience that work well for me. If you're not real familiar with me, this is a very short version and all you need to know. If big national magazines said the guy in the pink suit, apparently in this picture, or the guy in the pink shirt was the best because he trained the Coast Guard and military and big large fleets and mostly private owners and light aircraft, and everybody thought he was brilliant. In fact, so many people thought I was smart that in 2019, they gave me the National Instructor of the Year. I'm not smart. I just think nobody else ran that year. But hey, I'll take it. But I don't want anybody to be impressed by books and articles and awards. I just have a lot of experience. How many of you are great at your full-time job if you've been doing it 20 years, right? Because you've experienced every mistake. You've researched it. I've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours taking training, reading documents, and researching and practicing with avionics. You'd be good at it too. So after 2 decades and 8,700 hours, if you taught very large flight schools and you did helicopter sightseeing flights, if you've taught in well over 100 aircraft, everything from light piston to twin turboprops jets and turbine rotorcraft in every Bravo airspace. Well, that's Arnold Palmer, which is not just iced tea and lemonade, by the way. He's a very famous golfer, and he says, it's a funny thing, the more I practice, the luckier I get. So let's just recall, I've never, ever claimed to be smart. I just have the most experience of any IFR instructor in the world specializing in technically advanced aircraft. I have more time in more locations and more aircraft than anybody else, teaching people who are already great pilots how to be even better through mastery of their autopilots, Avidyne, Dynan, ForeFlight. Of course, 98% of the world runs by Garmin, but Collins Proline, Honeywell, CAS. If you'd done it for that long, everybody would think you're smart too. But what it really is I've just picked up lots of tricks through doing it. The problem is sometimes when I say things that are new, that totally contradict what the regulations say sometimes in this case, or your really good instructor or a really good examiner taught you, sometimes people get upset. So there's a really good quote from Wayne Dyer. It says, fear of the unknown. They're afraid of new ideas. People are loaded with prejudices, not based on it being real, but based on if it's new or different than what I know, I reject it immediately because it's frightening. So not only do they stay with the familiar, but sometimes they get upset. So I've taught for years that I want the gear down and the first notch of approach flaps 5 miles before the initial approach fix. And I bet you some of you are going, what? No, that's wrong. I had one guy get so angry, he confronted me on stage at a national convention. I do it because the airlines do it. Now, not 5 miles, but the airlines for years have been fully configured before they intercept glide path. I have the research to prove that people who drop the gear at glide path or glide slope intercept, because it works and that's what they've been taught for all these years. Sometimes the gear doesn't go down and they're so busy they don't notice it. In fact, 1 to 2 people a week in the U.S. land gear up because they either didn't follow a checklist or they got rushed and didn't notice it. So even the airlines require fully configured gear down before glide slope intercept. Most of them do now. But he got very upset because that's what he knew was right. So if I say crazy things like that and it upsets you, do me a favor. You're very smart. You're active in the FAA Wings program. You're here. There's more about confronting primacy and decision fatigue and all that in my book, but try and ride through it. Try it my way, then go back to your way, see which one works better for you. That's all I ask. It is very important, and we're so glad you're here as part of the FAA Wings program. I am going to try and give you credit for this. I'm submitting it to the FAA. You just have to take a quick quiz at the end. But if you're not part of the Wings program, it's really important. Go to FAAsafety.gov and click Create a New Account. Why? Because the FAA really never wants to suspend or revoke a pilot certificate if you made a mistake. Now, gross negligence, that's bad. Deliberate, careless, and reckless, that's bad. But if you just make a mistake, what they'll do is they'll send you a letter. You have to call them. I don't care what the experts on Facebook say. You got to call them. Tell them the truth. My name's Gary. I got an airspace violation letter. I'd like to tell you what happened, but can I give you the email address of the FAA Wings program that I use? And they have something called compliance. They're not kinder or gentler, they're compliance. If you're not active in any education, but you're honest with them and you tell them what happened, what they'll do is they might assign you an instructor. They'll send you a list. Hey, hire one of these people. You got to pay them, okay, for 2 hours of ground and 1 hour of flight, for example. And then they'll write a report that you're educated so it doesn't happen again. All they want to do is give you education so it doesn't happen again, right? Suspending or revoking your pilot certificate is totally ineffective if you own the airplane because you'll just keep flying, okay? And there's many fatal accidents like that. But if you call them up and you tell them you're active in the Wings program, you tell them what went wrong, you're honest about it, and you tell them what you're doing to make sure it never happens again, they generally just say okay and close it out. So, and Avemco Insurance gives discounts, lots of benefits for being in the Wings program. It's free, and it's just a way of proving that you go way beyond just the basics. So everything I'm going to say today is just my opinion, including what I just said. I don't work for the FAA either. I have lots of strong opinions, but I say never a lot, and I say you should always do this because it's a way to emphasize a point and break through primacy blocks occasionally. But if I say you should never, ever do this, there's got to be 20 or 30 different scenarios where you should do that. If I say you should always, always do this, there's going to be 40 or 50 examples when doing that's not going to work for you. So I can't cover every conceivable scenario and local circumstance. But if I say never, there's exceptions. If I say always, there's exceptions. So what are we going to cover today? Let's keep it moving. Well, we're going to talk about how the regulations, which are rather old and still being taught and tested today, don't really work well in the real world anymore. The 3 alternates I would like you to have in every flight plan, doesn't matter if it's required or not, is the weather alternate. Y'all are pretty familiar with that. A destination alternate, which is different than a weather alternate. And any of my airline pilots out there watching, you're all like, yeah, we do a takeoff alternate. Most of GA pilots, you may not have heard of it. It's really important to have, and I'm going to cover that. Then we're going to do a quick quiz, which is the same quiz as you're going to take later, so pretty easy to pass. But it's not for you. It's really to make sure I covered anything. And I'll cover a couple common questions, and we'll let you go. This is going to be pretty quick. This is a very brief, abbreviated version of part of the video content that goes into my online mastery series. So this little 1 hour sample session is going to be 4 or 5 hours, much expanded with real in-flight footage, but in multiple different videos. So this is just a good intro, and I hope you enjoy it. So let's talk about the regulations and sometimes a conflict with real world flying. Y'all are pretty familiar with 91-167. Even if you didn't know that what it was called. That's that 45-minute reserve thing. So 91-167 says you have to carry enough fuel on an IFR flight plan to fly to the first planned airport that's landing, and if the weather dictates, get to your required alternate airport, and then after that, be able to fly at normal cruise power and speed for a minimum of 45 minutes. Bet all of you knew that, but I teach in a lot of rotorcraft. I'm not a helicopter instructor. I understand the things on the floors aren't called rudder pedals, but they kind of work. That's my experience in rotorcraft. But I spend a lot of time teaching avionics in helicopters, right? So I do want to include my rotor friends. Helicopter people, you only need 30 minutes of fuel reserve. So for essentially airplanes, all aircraft but helicopters, and I don't think a lot of balloons do IFR, 91169er is when is an alternate required. Well, you should all be pretty familiar with the 1-2 tree rule. If the forecasted weather at your destination for 1 hour before to 1 hour after your expected time of arrival is below 2,000 or below 3 miles. It doesn't have to be both. Either one, you are required to list an alternate. For my rotor people, I like to call it, and I don't teach in helicopters, but I teach avionics. I probably made this up. I call it the 1 + 1 + 2 = 4 rule. So helicopters don't have to worry about the forecast before they get there. It's just the ETA +1 to 1 hour after. And the ceiling, if it's less than 1,000 feet, if the visibility is less than 2 statute miles, or the ceiling is less than 400 feet above the approach minimums. So the ceiling might be 1,100, but if the approach minimums were 700, then they'd still have to do it. So for rotorcraft, hope you like it. I just call it the 1 + 1 + 2 = 4. So the airport you're listing as an alternate has to qualify as an alternate, also in 91169er. And I think most of my airplane friends go, oh, that's the 602. ICAO does not consider LPV as precision, so they only count ILS or PAR. So if it has an ILS, the standard minimums to list it as an alternate would be 602. If it doesn't have an ILS, and that includes all RNAV, including LPV, ICAO requires 800 ceiling and 2 miles visibility. Now, I know it's a precision approach. And when I say that, it's just my opinion. Don't work for the FAA. I'm a lead rep for the FAA safety team. I don't work for them. I'm a national training provider for a bunch of companies. I don't work for them. I would never, ever fly an ILS if LPV was working. Most air traffic controllers, in fact, every air traffic controller all over the country I've ever talked to, they don't want you on the ILS. They list it on the ATIS because the airliners don't have WAS. That's why they do the ILS, and they have autoland capabilities. They would much prefer people with WAS to just do LPV. Why? It's not more precise, but it's much more stable. It's not an angular deflection. You don't overcorrect. Autopilots fly it better. You're much more likely to land safely than getting squirrely, cluttering up their airspace by going missed. The FAA, in fact, includes LPV as a precision approach for the instrument rating check ride, and on IPCs, as long as the DA is 250 feet or less. So I think it's precision. The FAA it's precision enough for check rides in an IPC, but ICAO doesn't count it. And the reason ICAO doesn't count it as a precision is because of the GPS spoofing and the possibility of a GPS outage. So if the approach plate had a reverse print A on the government chart, that means it might have an ILS or an RNAV, but it's not going to be 602 or 802. You're going to have to go into the TERP supplements and look up something different. So almost every airport, for example, with an ILS is going to have a note in the TERP supplement that says you can't file this airport as an alternate if you plan on using the ILS when the control tower is closed. It's not authorized. And that's because the control tower monitors the ILS. Otherwise, they don't know if it's working or not. And of course, you can get to any airport if you can descend along a Victor Airway or whatever to VFR conditions. For the rotorcraft, your alternate, just to be legal, the airport has to be a forecast of at least 200 feet above approach minimums. And it's the minimum for approach at least 1 mile. So if the visibility minimum for an approach is 3/4 of a mile, helicopter pilots still have to have the 1 mile, okay? Or just like anybody else, if they can get to VFR. So I want to talk about, we know the regulations. So if I file from Mitchell County, or if I file from MSL down to Mitchell County, and the forecast at Mitchell County, and this is a MECHAR, but it's very close to the TAF, says it's scattered at 900. Doesn't matter if the visibility is 5, I have to list an alternate. So the rule you've learned, the 1, 2, 3, and the 602, 802 thing, doesn't work anymore. Now let me tell you when it did work. 30 years ago, 25 years ago, when I learned IFR, I learned to fly in Southern California in Long Beach. I owned a big flight school there. I would frequently go to Napa, which was about 2.5, 3 hours in a 182 or a 206, because that's where they kept all the good wine. But we didn't have data link weather. Can you imagine a world with no iPads? There was no XM or FSB weather. We didn't have weather in the cockpit. And most airports don't have TAFs, and TAFs are not even good for 5 nautical miles. They're only good for 5 statute miles. So the TAF doesn't even cover the 5-mile central ring of most Charlies. It's only good for 4.7. So if the nearest TAF was Oakland or San Francisco, it'd probably be Oakland, and Napa being 40 miles away, that's not very helpful. They didn't have MOS. Now there's a graphically approved MOS from the FAA called a LAMP MOS. The MOS on ForeFlight is not legal because it's not certified by the FAA. It's got some small glitches, but it's a good general idea. But if there wasn't, and we didn't have those, so if there wasn't a TAF, they would do these awful things called an area forecast. And FAA is slightly dyslexic. They called it an FA. And it basically went like this. For Northern California and parts of Southern Oregon, it was a huge area. Every 8 hours or 3 times a day, we think the weather is going to be kind of close to this. So I didn't really know what the weather was going to be like in Napa. I didn't have weather with me. So if they said, well, the weather at Napa could be 1,800 foot overcast. Well, it could deteriorate very, very quickly because that's a huge area. So it would be a great idea to carry enough gas in case I got there and the weather deteriorated below my personal capabilities or below the published minimums, that if I had to go missed, I should carry enough gas to get to somewhere with a different weather pattern. And they should have a forecasted ceiling of, for like a VOR approach, at least 802. That all made sense, and it was totally correct. Today, it's the dumbest thing I have ever heard. So if you filed from MSL to Camille Mitchell County, CXU, and you have data link weather on the iPad that's XM or FSB, if that's a 3-hour trip and you take off and there's a giant line of thunderstorms and 45 minutes, half hour before your destination, according to the rules, you are supposed to plan to fly through the line of thunderstorms, to do an approach with quarter-mile visibility, lightning, and hail, and you've never done a missed approach for real on your own in really bad weather and icing, and then you're supposed to go to another airport, which was within 45 minutes, but on the backside of the thunderstorm. Does anybody here think that's just kind of dumb? It made sense when we didn't have weather. Now that we have modern technology, I think we should plan a little bit better. When do you think most fatal accidents happen? You think most fatal accidents happen in the first 10 minutes of flight, halfway when they're still in good weather, or after 3 hours when they get there and it's in bad weather? Well, duh. When do you think workload is the highest? Well, duh. When do you think fatigue is highest? Get there-itis is not so much a thing that you think it is. Remember all my opinions. What actually happens is there's something called decision fatigue. And the first sign of decision fatigue, when you've made too many decisions that day and your blood sugar's low, if there's any fear or stress, it just totally throws all your logical controls out the window. That's decision fatigue. That's why people die. So, and that's covered in my book quite a bit if you'd like to learn more about that. It's not that get there-itis is not real. It's actually a sign of decision fatigue. The first sign of decision fatigue is the inability to discontinue your plan and do something else. So the regs 25 years ago with area forecast, we didn't have en route data link weather, Sirius XM or TSB. Having 45 minutes of gas to fly a mist and get to an alternate airport with predicted air ceiling was a good idea. True or false? It was absolutely true. Okay, let's try another one. True or false? Today with data link weather, and it's not real time. You don't be poking through lines of thunderstorms. It's not real time. It's close, but it can be in worst case scenarios, 25 minutes old. You shouldn't be poking through lines of thunderstorm where the thunderstorm was, right? But an hour before you get to your destination, it's great for the big picture. So with today's data link weather, if you saw a thunderstorm before your destination, following the regulations by flying an approach in known bad weather below your capabilities, then holding and diverting to another airport is a good idea. No bueno. I actually speak like 6 languages, and all of them horribly, by the way, especially English. This just sounds like a horrible idea. So let's talk about the way I would pick your weather alternate, which is the first thing. Let's plan a flight from McGee, Arkansas down to Meridian, Mississippi. I always start my flight plans with GPS Direct. In my opinion, you should never, ever, ever file GPS Direct. It is absolutely, totally wrong in my opinion. It's not easier for air traffic control. You're making their job much, much harder. The first guy may, yeah, sure, you're cleared out of my sector, but the next 3 guys, that's not going to work. If you file GPS Direct, it is much, much harder on controllers and much, much harder on you. They've got to come up with new routes for you, and then you got to program new routes while you're flying. GPS Direct to an airport doesn't make much sense, but go into my IFR mastery videos and you'll see why. But we got to start out GPS Direct. Now, the ForeFlight Route Advisor. Tyson, if you're listening, my friend, you invented the greatest thing to ever hit aviation. ForeFlight makes everything easier, and if you've ever carried 40 pounds of jet binders, you would agree with me. But ForeFlight's amazing, but I don't think people know what ForeFlight is. Because, for example, they're going to call this a ForeFlight Route Advisor. So it recommends in a Cessna 182 that I fly at 11,000 direct through Omoa. That's never going to happen. I'm telling you this because I fly IFR every single day. I flew today. I flew yesterday. A month ago, I was in Newark. The day before that, I was in like Midland, Texas. I do this every day for a living, and I'll tell you what I found. I can file IFR and get cleared right through restricted areas almost every time. Because, yeah, I know it's restricted areas, and they might even be active, but they're controlled. They know where everybody is, and they're usually not using the whole area. I'm usually just going through a corner, and they don't have a problem with it. I always will get an amended clearance to go around a MOA, because under IFR, they can't guarantee me spacing because people in the MOA don't have to get flight following. They're not talking to them. So in my experience, I'm telling you, I go through restricted areas every single day, never a quibble. They're never going to let me go through a MOA. In fact, the 2 times I've almost been hit on an IFR flight plan was in a MOA. One of them was in IMC conditions, and there was some guy squawking 1200 that came very, very close to me. So how about the second advice? A huge Tango Victor Airway mess at 17,000. I don't think my 182 does 17,000. So what you need to know is ForeFlight's not dumb. It's not wrong. It's just not an advisor. It's a computer history. Just like when you search on the web, that history builds up, right? There is no human being. I have a really good friend that is an instrument instructor. Thomas, if you're listening from ForeFlight, he's amazing. He teaches at a lot of conventions with me. He's got 500 hours. I mean, good, smart guy. He's not looking at your flight plan either. He got 8,700 hours and 22 years of real-world experience. I'm not seeing it. Nobody is seeing it. So the advisor's not an advisor because it's not a human being with real-world IF experience giving you good suggestions. It's just a history of the clearances that actually got issued. So maybe it's a good idea and safe and preferred by ATC. Maybe, and I find this most of the time, it's really inefficient. I'm going to get rerouted 6 times because it doesn't work for any controller but the first one. And in the worst case thing, it could even put you in danger because nobody's looking. You just don't know. That's the problem. So my slogan, obviously, is mastery, not minimums. ForeFlight is the best thing to ever hit general aviation if you have a mastery level of knowledge and know when the feature should be used and when the feature should not be used. Because ForeFlight's got all these features, and sometimes they're the best things ever. Sometimes it can put you at risk or make your life harder. A mastery level of training, meaning you got training for somebody with real world experience, teaches you when they're good and when they're not. So I'm not going to use the ForeFlight Route Advisor on this particular scenario. One coming up, I have to use a ForeFlight Route Advisor. So I don't like going through MOAs. I really like adding a VOR to every flight. And if it's a long flight, multiple, because you should be prepared for GPS failures and GPS spoofing. A SAFO, a safety alert for flight operators issued by the FAA in 2024 said, GPS should not be relied on for IFR navigation. What? Like I built a brand being GPS guy in the pink shirt. Now you're telling me I can't use it? There are people in the U.S. that are not good people generating fake signals trying to cause airplane crashes. They tried to shut down DFW for 2 days in January by making the parallel RNAV approaches merge, and they would have killed hundreds, if not thousands of people at once with big airliners hitting each other. Why didn't it happen? Well, because the airliners don't mostly have WAS. Their RNAV system's based on DME, and they have a non-WAS GPS as a backup. Hey, the DME stations are correct. So they kept getting these warning flags that the GPS had to miscompare with what their DME-based RNAV was doing, and they called it out to ATC, and it was spoofing. It's never you're flying along and all of a sudden the pink line turns 90 degrees right. They start drifting very subtly a little bit left or right, and we're pretty sure they flew a business jet up into a mountain in the northern U.S. this year and killed like 8 people. So you need to be ready to use the MON system. Always have a nearby VOR along your route. You need it to monitor it for spoofing, and you need to be able to use it. So I like doing the VOR. So that's going to work. I'm going to get that clearance every single time. Now, what about the alternate advisor? So when you send the ForeFlight plan from the maps over to the flights, if you click on alternate, it's going to bring up an alternate advisor. And again, sometimes it's a good idea, sometimes it's not. Let's look at this one. So the suggested, doesn't that sound like somebody recommending it? Like, oh, that's preferred. Sometimes you'll use the term preferred. Suggested, well, that's a good suggestion. It's not. It's what people have picked most often. If you look at MPE, which is Philadelphia Muni, you're going through bad weather to do an approach in the heart of a thunderstorm to then pick an alternate way too close where the thunderstorm is building and that's the way it's moving. This would not be good. So I want to do a test. And remember, ForeFlight, best thing ever. Garmin, Pilot, FlyQ, Flight Plan Go. All these things are wonderful, right? They're all good EFBs, but they're not human. So I'm going to do a test. Do you like the ForeFlight Alternate Advisor, which is after going missed in bad weather, go to another airport in bad weather? Or do you like the GPS guy in the pink shirt advisor that says, why don't you stop 45 minutes before your destination while you're still in good weather before you try 2 approaches in bad weather? I'm going pink over blue on this one. I promise you nobody has ever died by stopping safely in good weather before trying approaches in bad weather, right? Lots of people die by doing approaches in bad weather, right? So if you always call yourself a little bit of a chicken, I'm the biggest chicken on the planet. If I'm 45 minutes out and the weather at my destination is going below my personal minimums, doesn't have to go below published, just got to go below my personal minimums, or there's active convection or icing or something before that, I'm going to be the first guy to chicken out, stop, and land 45 minutes before I get there, right? Because you can't die by landing while you're still safe. So what I'm going to do is I've already got the weather at my alternate, which is going to be Jackson. And you'll notice I put a VOR there, right? So I'm going to overlay the approach. Now, you don't wait for the ATIS to hear what approach you're going to fly. You got a weather briefing. You should know what RNAV you want. Don't worry about if the ATIS says ILS or whatever. Again, just my opinion. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to overlay the approach plate on the map, and that VOR is going to be, and I'm going to mark it up on the map on paper for check rides is a good idea, or on ForeFlight. I'm going to put a big pink yellow line there, and I'm going to call it my weather decision point. What is my weather decision point? Well, my weather decision point is on the map. I have to get updated data link weather, XM, or relayed FISB at my destination before I get to that point. If I don't like the weather, that's where I must stop or continue. If you don't mark it up on the map, you won't remember to stop and make a decision. But if we made our weather decision point there, let's test my theory. So anything with pink and a yellow background is a test answer. In my opinion, and hopefully yours after this, the best choice for a weather alternate airport is one before you fly into bad weather. Ask yourself this: how many missed approaches in bad weather at or below published minimums, in icing, low-level wind shear, and convection, have you flown for real? Well, probably never. Or if you have done an approach that was below the published minimums or below your capabilities, you had an instructor. So if you're a GA pilot, you're very, very smart, you're very, very good at your full-time job. I don't believe GA pilots that fly 2 or 3 times a month should be trying approaches down to published minimums in bad weather, because you don't do it often enough. You don't have the experience, right? Professional pilots, I do it every day. Yeah, no big deal, but I wouldn't go down to published minimums. If I can't get in at 150 feet up and an extra quarter-mile visibility or so, I'm going to stop earlier, because I don't have to fly in known bad weather, because I never have to be there, right? Saying I have to be there but dying on the way doesn't work. So let me ask you all a question. True or false? Everybody who died by trying an approach in bad weather below their capabilities or minimums would have survived if they stopped in good weather first. Well, yeah, it has to be true. All right, so let's talk about a destination alternate. Now, we love GA because aviation allows us to, it's a time machine. It gets you to where you want to get, right? And a lot of times, like I'm traveling to get to a client, or I'm taking a client somewhere, or you're getting there for a business meeting or a big family reunion, right? So you want to get there. But that's kind of dangerous, because if you get locked up and I'm going to land there, even if there's good weather and it doesn't require weather alternate, you need to pick an alternate. So I think if it's great weather, instead of a weather alternate, you're going to have a destination alternate. I still put a weather alternate 45 minutes out, because who knows what's going on. But I actually do want a destination alternate, and let me tell you why. I was flying in Newark and New York airspace. It's the busiest airspace in the world. You have to use the ForeFlight Route Advisor. This is an example of it's always the best way. Why? Because it's so congested and it's so busy. ATC has cleared that 21 times. My whole GPS direct to the initial approach fix is never going to work, right? So this is when the ForeFlight Route Advisor is awesome. Remember, mastery is not saying Route Advisor is good or bad. It's knowing when it's good and when it's not. So absolutely, I'm going to pick that route. And that's from Martha's Vineyard over to Essex County, Charlie Delta Whiskey, Essex County, New Jersey. And then I click on the alternate. And they think that Teterboro is a good alternate. It's 4 minutes away. That would be a really horrible alternate for weather. But it's absolutely correct as a destination alternate. So what you want to do is you file a weather alternate 45 minutes before, whether you're required to or not, my opinion. And then you always pick the very closest airport to your destination where you need to be that's big enough to have an Uber pickup. Why? Remember what I told you about the whole primacy, glide path, intercept, gear down thingy? The reason I don't like that is because 1 to 2 people in the U.S. every single week land gear up. That's kind of the tradition. Sometimes they don't use a checklist. Sometimes they have problems. Sometimes they do it when they're busy, like at the final approach fix and they get rushed. So I like putting the gear down first, but 1 to 2 people a week typically will gear up in the U.S. and then they close the whole airport. So can you imagine if you filed to Essex County and you were like on the approach, like you were about ready to start the approach and the airport got closed because somebody geared up? Nobody believes me. It happens to me at least every 2 years. Now, look, I do a lot of approaches and a lot of IFR flying. So it happens to me more frequently, but this happens to me at least every 2 years. So if you do my 3-day mastery, which is a really intense program, I'm going to make you do this, and y'all are going to look at me and go, well, we don't need that. Okay, well, we did on this one. This is actual in-flight screenshots and video footage. So part of my 3-day is I actually record in flight so you can see it, and I take the best bits and put it in my online video mastery courses. Like the only reason I even sell the online video mastery courses is everybody wants to be great. Most people can't take 3 days off and get my schedule. So by selling an online video mastery, that's the difference between mine and everybody else. John and Martha are my friends. They have a great G1000 course. Mine has real in-flight footage with real-world stuff, right? So this happened to us. So Karen Wolf and I were in a Bonanza, and she actually had done 5 days of training, and we're coming back into Newark airspace at night, and you can see I've overlaid the plate. We're getting pretty close to starting at the initial approach fix. Well, we were very, very close, and ATC came on and said, Essex County Airport, Charlie Delta Whiskey is now closed for an aircraft accident. A Cessna 310, I believe, took off from Essex County at night, and they had a major electrical problem. He made a great decision. Turn around, go back. But I don't know what was going on in the cockpit, so I don't know if he had time to do this, but people tend to lock up a little bit. It's called decision fatigue and adrenaline paralysis. If he had the time to safely slow down and run a manual gear extension checklist before he landed, this would not have happened. Most people lock up, they start moving too fast, that's decision fatigue and adrenaline paralysis, and they don't. But I don't know what was going on in the cockpit. If there's smoke in the cockpit or something, I don't care if the gear's up, right? So I don't know what happened, so I can't tell you if he's good or bad. But just like I promised you, every 2 years, about 5 minutes before I land, the airport got closed because of a gear up landing. It happens all the time. So now what? So he said, Bonanza, whatever. Fly this heading. I'll get back to you in 5 minutes. Have a request. Poof. And then he went on to 20 other guys. So if you've never had the joy of flying in Newark, JFK, Boston airspace, they don't take readbacks all the time. It's like, you do this break, you do this break, you do this break. So using the ForeFlight Route Advisor, knowing what works better for them is great. But being ready to divert, even when you're almost there, is even better. So because I had picked Teterboro, which the alternate advisor on ForeFlight recommended, I simply slowed from 150 knots to 110, and it gave me time to check the ATIS at Teterboro. Now, ForeFlight has these wonderful things called scratch pads. After 5 days of training, and it's a little bumpy and I'm tired at night, my handwriting is not that great. So let me tell you what it says. That's Teterboro ATIS information mic. The wind was 060 at 8. Visibility was 10. The sky was clear. The temperature was 26. The dew point was 14. I never put the 30 or the 29er. I can figure it out. It was 29er, and they're doing the RNAV Yankee for runway 19er because it's what they always do when the winds are under 20 or 30 knots because they're so close to Newark Airport. That's the only one that works. So I had, before I'd taken off, already marked up my destination alternate plates. So you can see I put in all altitudes. I've highlighted the initial approach fixes, the final approach fix. There's a decision altitude, which is rounded up about 150 feet above the published. And then there's some missed approach instructions. So I'm already prepped for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to overlay the new approach on the map. And then Avidyne, which is amazing, it's called an FMS. It's a little bit more advanced than some GPS because you can actually add another airport and preload the approaches at the end of a flight plan. You could load 5 different airports with 5 different approaches and they're all there. Most GPS systems don't do that. So Garmin, which is amazing, right? You get an all Garmin panel. That auto land, smart glide, fully coupled go around is better than anybody else, right? So a fully coupled Garmin panel is amazing too. They're both great. They're just in different ways. You can't add another approach because then it deletes part of your flight plan and you haven't been cleared for that. So what I want you to do is I added, so remember I say never file GPS direct to an airport. If there's no arrival, I file to the initial approach fix and then the airport. Somebody online the other day goes, Gary says you should file to the initial approach fix, not the airport. The editor of my book, the guy who had read my book, went, well, that's wrong. I filed to the airport. Mike, you edited my book. That's not what I teach. I can't tell you the page number. I say put your initial approach fix in before your airport because then the controllers know what to expect from you. They know you're going to want this. So I added Strad, the IAF, then Teterboro to the end of my flight plan. I can't load an approach or anything. All right. And then you can see when I load it from the panel, it's all ready to go. Then I simply am ready. And it wasn't 5 minutes, less than 2.5 minutes, but I already had all this done. HEC goes, Bonanza, whatever, say request. And I said, who was I talking to? New York approach, Bonanza, whatever. I would like a left turn direct Strad, Sierra Tango Romeo Alpha Delta. It's the initial approach fix for the RNAV Yankee runway 19er. I'm full stop at Teterboro with ATIS Mike. And he said, done. Direct Nibby, maintain best forward speed until 1 mile outside final. Now, again, I like gear down and flaps set to approach, and in Bonanzas, I like 110 to 120, 5 miles before the initial approach fix. It was VMC. There were 2 pilots in the plane, and I went, yep, no problem. So I went, okay, direct Nibby. Because all I did at that point was load the procedure, activate it, then I went direct to Nibby, which is the IF. And boom, I'm on my way. It was done in 3 seconds. So if you kind of want to see what landing in Newark looks like at night when 1 million people are diverting and trying to land at Teterboro Airport, and Newark is sharing a parking lot, it seems like.
Minimum.
So before any super warriors criticize my student for landing 2 feet right of center line, we'd been flight training for 5 days, 2 days in the very busiest airspace in the U.S., if not the world, and probably just the U.S. After an 8-hour day with a last-minute diversion, she did a full stall perfect landing in the first third and made the first big exit, y'all heard how crazy Teterboro Tower was, right? But it's easy if you plan ahead. So the test answer that you're going to see on a quiz in a few minutes is the best choice for a destination alternate airport, in my opinion, is usually the closest airport to your destination in case your airport closes before you land because somebody gears up in a city big enough to get an Uber. Hey, I had a scheduled flight out of Newark the very next morning back home to Texas. Teterboro had lots of Ubers, right? Landing at some non-towered airport a mile away from your destination airport because you didn't plan ahead, if they don't have a city, it can be pretty hard for you to get somewhere. So a little bit of planning will get you farther. And congratulations to Karen, who did, we normally do 3 days of training. She wanted to know everything about everything. So we actually spent over 5 days together. What is my 3-day? Well, it's pretty intense. We do assign you over 20 hours of videos and one of my book, if not both, to read and watch before I get there. Now, nobody ever does. Why? Because everybody goes, oh, yeah, I'm going to see you in 4 or 5 months. I'm usually booked out a little bit of events. Sometimes I can do it quick, but, oh, yeah, I've got like 3 months and I'll watch all the videos. No, you won't. I know you're lying. You don't know you're lying. It's not a lie. It's not intentional, but everybody probably on this video has a real job and family and friends and a life. Karen was one of those people that actually booked 4 months out so she could specifically do all that. The first day is very intense. It's 8 to 9 hours of ground because I have to talk about all those regulations which were taught by good instructors, tested on by great examiners. They're on the FAA written test and they're still current, and how sometimes they don't work well with new technology in the modern world. So you have to change the way you plan and the way you think. The second day is 2 flights. They're very intense. It's 2.5 hours to 3 hours each with ground before and in the middle and afterwards. The first flights, this is how things work when they're right, but we're never ever going to do vectors to final. Nobody would ever hire me to learn how to vectors to final. You can download an iPad sim and watch a YouTube video. I'm not going to cover the stuff you're good at when things are good. I'm teaching you when things go wrong. So we start to do some simulated problems, including turning off all GPS, including the little blue plane on ForeFlight, and you have no situational awareness at all. You got to join a VOR, get to a Victor Airway. Then you imagine this. You have to do a VOR approach with a procedure turn with no GPS guidance at all. I even take the plane off ForeFlight. And you got to do it with a timer. Then you do the approach with a timer. Then we do the published approach and hold with a timer. Y'all remember wind corrections and how to do that? Most people today are not very good at it because you don't do it anymore, right? So we need to make you great at that. And then the third day is even more fun stuff. It's nothing but simulated emergencies. In fact, my favorite thing to do, we're going to divert 3 minutes before your destination and go to your destination alternate because if it happens, you're ready. But my favorite thing to do at the end of the third day is actually cover your entire panel, including your standby gauges. And under the hood, using nothing but ForeFlight, I let you land the plane off an instrument approach. I'm looking outside. I'm never going to let you get hurt. But I was flying a G1000 equipped airplane one night near Salt Lake City over the mountains in light icing IMC, and something bad happened, and the entire electrical system suffered a sudden catastrophic shutdown. Don't worry about the backup battery. It got fried too. I didn't even have cockpit lighting. So everyone goes, oh, I'll fly my standbys, or oh, I've got a battery backup. I'm really glad I had ForeFlight connected to a Stratus 3 or a Sentry for people like that, and not tied to the panel, or tied to the panel and a Stratus 3, which is my preference, or a Sentry Pro Plus, which is amazing, because then I can still do an approach. It's legal because it's an emergency. I can call ATC on my cell phone because I pair it to my headset, not the audio panel, and I can get low enough to land, and that's exactly what happened to me. And I actually let you land the wheels. So it's a pretty fun experience. It is exhausting, but you're going to be great when things go wrong, not just good when things are normal. So if you want to learn more about that, that's fine. All right, so what the heck's a takeoff alternate? Well, any airline pilots online are going, yeah, we know, I know. But for the rest of us, let me explain. I want you to plan an airport that you're going to land at in IMC doing an approach if you have smoke in the cockpit or engine roughness at 3 minutes after takeoff. And everybody goes, well, I'll just come back to home. Well, if you haven't planned on how to get back to your departure airport, you won't. And returning to your departure airport may be right, maybe not. So this is an actual in-flight recording of my ForeFlight IFR Mastery course. We were going from Decatur, Texas up to Chickasha, Oklahoma. And of course, we're using the Nander 2 SID. I always use a SID and a star if they have them. It's easier for you in ATC. And this is actually going to be in-flight footage. But let me show you. If we take off out of Decatur and we take off to the south, if I thin out the departure plate and I go, okay, well, if I'm going to take off to the south, it's always 163 ODP, entering control airspace left 090. That's what Lone Star Approach does. Okay, so if I've been flying for 3 minutes and I'd be about at that point, and right at that point, there was smoke in the cockpit, rough running engine. People go, well, I'll just return to my home airport. Well, let's see how far that is. So if I touch Decatur and I overlay the RNAV 17, because that's favorable winds, and not the taxi diagram, let me turn it up. There we go. Let's see. From where I was, the red line, that would be vectors pretty far north. Then they have to intercept you on a 30-degree angle, minimum 1 mile outside the gate, the final approach fix. Let me see what that would be. So in a Cessna Cardinal, we're doing about 90 knots in the climb. Even if we accelerated to 120, if you add up all these miles, and I don't know if you can get to 120 with a bad engine, if we added up all those mileage, and that's a ForeFlight ruler, which is another great feature from ForeFlight. If you add up all those miles, that adds up to 32 miles. So even if you could get to 120 knots, that's 16 minutes in the clouds with smoke in the cockpit or a failing engine. So saying, I'll just return to my departure airport, in this case doesn't work. What I want you to do is think. Sometimes returning to your destination all correct, but look, Denton Airport is right there along my route. It's where I'm going to go because they're going to vector me to join it. They're not actually taking me to Cusno. So if I had that same rough running engine or smoke in the cockpit, there'd be a much shorter vector. So if we measure those distances, plus like 4.5, 5, plus there's another 5, well, that's better. So returning to my destination airport in bad weather with smoke in the cockpit was 32 miles or 16 minutes. This is 25 miles or 12.5 minutes. If you've never had an engine fire, and I have, if you've never had an engine failure, and I have, I promise you 12.5 minutes is better than 16. Flying 3.5 minutes less with smoke in the cockpit is a much better option, right? Now, what you'll notice is I overlaid the ILS, but Gary, you don't do ILS. Well, for my takeoff alternate, if the nearest airport, which may be my home airport, and don't think I wouldn't turn around and do the RNAV 35 and land with a tailwind, because I would if I could get below, the clouds. But I actually prefer an ILS instead. Let me show you why. So you'll notice that I've marked up my charts because I always do. The course is 177. The 109.1 is the IDTO localizer. It's 2200 outside the final approach fix, and I actually put the published minimums, D850, because this is an emergency thing, inside. Why do I like the ILS? Well, this is real in-flight footage. Watch. See how he's turning me to intercept that Nandor Doblico leg? He's kind of put me on a vector for final on that localizer anyway. So what would you do if you had a very nice Cessna Cardinal? Thanks, Brian, for letting me do this. With a GTN 650 and a Garmin 530 WAS, what would you do?
And we'll pre-select 109.1.
And make it active. So we've got the Nandor 2 Will Rogers transition departure coming out of the GTN, and the flight plan downloads to the 530. So that's the GPS flight plan. On the PFD, in this case a G3X Plus, it's showing that. But I'm going to switch the 530 WAS, the one on the bottom, to VLOC. It's already tuned to 109.1, and I'm going to put the Denton Tower frequency as active on COM2. So I'm ready to go, and it's actually much quicker than loading an RNAV. So it kind of popped up behind my video there, but we'll work with it. The best choice for a takeoff alternate might not be returning to your home airport. Is there an airport on your route that's closer? And taking off with a localizer or ILS approach is actually easier than RNAV. So if you had pre-tuned the localizer, the 530 was switched to VLOC, and you had that bearing showing on the display. You switch the PFD to localizer 2. That's 2 buttons. You set the course to 177. That's twisting 1 knob. And then you fly it. You've already got the plan on ForeFlight. You don't even have to load the procedure on a Garmin. It's already ready to go. That's 4 to 5 buttons, and I have and can do that in 3 seconds. If you want to do an RNAV, you have to go home, nearest airports. There's 3 button pushes. Touch the one you want, that's 4. Direct to, that's 5. Activate, that's 6. Then you have to do procedure, that's 7. Select the approach, that's 8. Touch the one you want, that's 9. Touch vectors to final, that's 10. And hit load and activate, that's 11. It's a lot, and it typically takes most good people over 10 seconds. So you see why I like the ILS, because I can preload everything. And don't think if I have smoke in the cockpit or engine fire or something nasty that I'm not just going to start heading towards it and say Lone Star, rotorcraft or TBM or Jet or Cessna or whatever I'm in that day. Mayday, 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 smoke in the cockpit. We're heading towards the ILS 18 right in Denton. I'm providing my own vectors. I'm full stop. I need the fire trucks. And I can already head that way, right? You don't have to get ATC permission to do something in an emergency. So I hope you all enjoyed it. We're coming up on an hour. I think that's about right. Let's do a quick quiz just to make sure I covered everything. The best choice for an alternate in case of bad weather at your destination is usually A, whatever the ForeFlight Alternate advisor suggests. B, something past the destination far enough away to have different weather after you've done a missed approach. C, before your destination, because it's always safer to stop in good weather conditions first. Or D, an airport with an ILS. Hopefully you've come around to the GPS pink shirt advisor and think that stopping in good weather is a better choice. So if there are any students listening or any examiners listening or any instructors listening, hey, thanks for sharing your time. Students, I'm going to tell you something. Examiners are very, very smart, and they don't care if you've memorized, called rote memory, you've memorized a couple rules. You're probably going to fail the check ride if you've only memorized a couple rules because you don't understand how they work. If you go into any examiner in the country and say, here's my flight plan, And I just want you to notice that I picked a nice Class Charlie airport because it's got lots of runways and hotels and rental cars and airline flights and flight attendants. Why are flight attendants so important if I have to divert to an alternate? Because pilots will eat anything, people. Trust me, if you're an airline pilot, you will eat 7-Eleven sushi. The cabin crew, the flight attendants, know the best restaurants in every single town. Oh, you got to go to Mario's. It's 3 doors down past this alley, and ask for the tacos. Pilots, they'll just, I don't know, I get fed at the hotel. Ask a flight attendant, and they'll always know the best decision. So best joke of the show. Sorry, that's the best. But by picking a Charlie or at least a nice towered busy Delta, it gives me options, right? So my personal preferences. When should pilots add an alternate to IFR flight plans? If it requires it because of the 91167 rules, which is the 1, 2, 3 rule, or the 1 + 1 + 2 = 4 rule for helicopters, on every IFR flight plan, even if the weather is VMC, only if you think you might need one, or D, both A and C. I recommend that we do it on every IFR flight plan. A destination alternate is A, the same as your weather alternate, B, not something pilots in the United States use. Hey, to my friends in Europe, by the way. C, the nearest airport you can get an Uber if your destination closes. Or D, not needed in VMC. Yeah, I think it's the nearest airport you can get an Uber close to your destination if you have to divert because somebody geared up. The current IFR regulations, and I know we don't have FARs anymore. I know it's something part of something title. But look, if they're going to print FAR AIM on the book, I'm still calling them FARs. So the IFR regulations in the FAR and best practices in the AIM, the ones in the Airman Certification Standards, the one taught by really great instrument instructors, the ones that you have to memorize to pass the written test, and the ones that are going to be discussed on the practical exam by great DPEs, A, are important really only to pass the written test and the check ride. B, should always be followed exactly because they cover every possible scenario. C, oh look, they cover every possible scenario. Or D, they may not apply flying today with different scenarios and new technology, especially like autopilots, GPS, and data link weather, which we didn't have before. Yep. Knowing the regulation is still critical. Knowing how a real understanding of it, a mastery level understanding of how your automation and your technology works, and being able to use it differently is called correlation. I promise students, if you go to an examiner and say, you know, I put my destination, nice Class Charlie, about 45 minutes before the destination you wanted, they're going to ask you, well, does that meet the requirements? And this is when you just show off. You go, hey, you're talking about the 45-minute fuel reserve thingy in the 1, 2, 3 rule? No, I don't care. It's just, this is a check ride. I'm really nervous. I'm very new. I just think if we take off and with data link weather, we see some thunderstorms and bad weather over our destination 45 minutes ahead of time, I just thought it'd be safer if you and I landed in good weather first. Don't you think that's safer? Examiners don't care if you memorize a couple rules. They care if you make good aeronautical decision making. That's going to pass you right there for the oral. They'll say, good job, let's go fly. Well, probably not, but it is safer, right? A takeoff alternate in the pink shirt opinion. A is easier to use if it's an ILS. B may be along your route instead of returning to your departure airport. C should be marked up and overlaid on ForeFlight before takeoff. Or D, all of the above. Everybody? Well, sure. All of the above. The best way I can tell you the definition of an emergency, and I was an EMT, paramedic, and lifeguard a billion years ago. The best definition of an emergency I ever got was from one of my instructors at paramedic college, and he said this: an emergency is something you haven't planned and trained for to handle. So if you see a little girl choking in public, everybody freaks, they lock up, the little girl tightens up through adrenaline release, the windpipe tightens, she gets no air, and everybody stands there doing nothing because they haven't planned for it and they haven't taken any training. Wouldn't be an emergency to me as a medic. I'm going to walk over, put down my sugar-free Red Bull, and be really annoyed if I have to set down a cookie. Pick up the little kid, do the Heimlich, take out the hot dog, give it to the mom, and go, don't feed kids hot dogs. I'm going to walk back, brush off whatever touched my cookie and my Red Bull, and I'm going to continue my day. It was an emergency to the mom. You better believe it was an emergency to the kid. And it's an emergency to all the bystanders who are just in there videoing. They don't even call 911. That's adrenaline. If you plan for and train for a takeoff alternate the day you need one, it wouldn't be an emergency to you either. The ForeFlight Route Advisor and Alternate Advisor. A, it's not an advisor. It's not smart or human. It's a Google history of the clearances and alternates that other people got. B, can show suggestions that could be wrong or even dangerous. C, can show suggestions that could be safer than others, and it's the one you should use. They're the best idea. Or D, all of the above. Like any technology, a mastery, not minimums, hashtag trademark, thanks, level of training will help you learn, not playing with stuff or taking advice from people on Facebook. But if you really have a deep, comprehensive level of understanding of limitations, when to use features, when not to use features, and when to use it in an emergency, then it's the best thing ever. ForeFlight is absolutely the best thing ever if you understand when to use the features and when to not use their features. Want to learn more about what I do? Pop on over to pilotsafety.org. Yeah, I do a lot of military law enforcement and Part 141 and 135 fleets, helicopter, jet, airvan, I don't care. I'm just there to say, don't push that. Let me show you a different way. I do these 3-day masteries in anything that flies. I promise you I won't touch the rudder pedals or whatever you call them in the helicopter. But it's for people that are already good, but have a bunch of new technology and want to be planned for and trained for when things aren't wrong. So it's pretty intense, but we do have a December special for 2024. I'm usually booked out a couple months in advance, but if you can make the deposit and train before June, be more than happy to give you $1,000 off, and there's a way to reach me for that. Obviously, the videos are available if anybody would like to do that. So let's just cover what I thought were the 3 alternates you should have in every IFR plan. You put a weather alternate 45 minutes before your destination, whether 91167 and 91169 requires it or not. You always list a destination alternate that is the closest airport with an Uber to your destination, because somebody's going to gear up on you one night. And 3, you should always be prepared for the very worst right after takeoff, and have a takeoff alternate, the closest one on your route, which may be turning around and coming back to your departure airport, or maybe something closer. To get wings credits, and right now I can do wings credits up until Monday the 12th, December 30th, but I'm going to apply to make this a permanent thing. It's just going to take me a while. But whether it's after December 30th, 2024 or not, please either scan the QR code or go to that link, which is https://pilotsafety.tv. We can remember that, /3 and all lowercase, alternates quiz. Whether you can get wings credits or not, take the quiz, because that way I can send you a certificate later, and it's going to take me a while, but I'll get you a certificate, and I can answer questions if you had one about this show. Everybody, I am so honored that you took an hour and 9-10 minutes to spend with me. Hope it's been helpful. If you all learned something, please share the link to this video. If you absolutely hated me and everything about it, please remember my name is Rod Machado, M-A-C-H-A-D-O. I only tell that joke because he's one of my dearest friends. He actually designed the book cover for my first best-selling book. So Rod knows I say it. It's just a joke. You could also say it was Martha King, and she thinks it's funny too. At any rate, thanks so much for spending your time. I'm Gary. Yeah, I really am a guy in a bright pink shirt, and I'll see y'all soon.